Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. We're talking in the last segment about Christianity and diet and nutrition. We read some excerpts from this story in the Wall Street Journal that there is no connection between saturated fat and heart disease. That's been a myth for 50 years. So cheese is not going to cause heart disease. Red meat's not going to cause heart disease. Eating butter's not going to cause heart disease. There is no connection between saturated fat and heart disease. And, you know, the biblical standard with almost everything is moderation in all things, exercising self-control. So we're not talking about going out and going crazy on anything, but, you know, we use the term a well-balanced diet, and that's a good term. That's moderation in all things, exercise of self-control, which is certainly what the scriptures teach. Now, our last caller at the end of the last segment asked a question about eating halal foods. And this is getting increasingly prevalent. In the UK, a lot of the places serve halal foods. A lot of the meat markets will only serve halal foods because they've got enough Muslims who live in their neighborhoods. There are some McDonald's now that advertise that they serve halal foods. In fact, some Islamic group I think in Michigan, up in the Detroit, Dearborn area, actually sued McDonald's because they claimed that McDonald's was kind of fooling people and were serving non-halal food by pretending it was, and McDonald's paid like $700,000 to make that thing go away. But the question she asks is, look, I go to a meat market. There may be meat there that's halal. There may be meat there that's kosher. In other words, it has been prepared according to Jewish dietary regulations. So the question is, can I, as a Christian, can I eat halal meat? Now, we know that halal meat, before it's butchered and sold in the meat market, has been sacrificed to idols. It has been offered to idols. I mean, they'll even do it mechanically. You go to a lot of these chicken processing plants in America, and they'll have some kind of loudspeaker thing droning this Islamic prayer over and over and over again while the chickens are being mechanically having their heads cut off. So they're being sacrificed to Allah, being sacrificed in the ritualistic way that Islam provides. So the question is, now Paul is very, very clear. I want to be clear about this. Let's deal with this first. Paul says, look, you are not to go into a pagan temple and engage in some kind of pagan worship service or pagan religious rituals. Stay away from there. Because when they go into their pagan temples, not talking about the meat market, not talking about eating at a restaurant, not talking about eating as a guest in somebody's house, but eating in a temple, because a lot of religions, I mean, Christianity has this, we call it the Lord's table, which is really, if you look back at 1 Corinthians 11, it was really a church potluck. It'd be the closest parallel we have to it today. It wasn't a little wafers and grape juice thing. I'm not down on that. Please don't misunderstand me. But the Lord's table in the New Testament was a meal. It was a full-blown communal meal. It was a potluck. So Christianity features fellowship around food. A lot of religions will have a connection at their worship experiences, their worship services. We take communion in the middle of our worship service. It's a religious ritual, if you want to use that term. And Paul says, look, I don't want you to go into any kind of pagan place of worship and participate with them, because what they are sacrificing in that temple, in that place of worship, are demons. He says this, flee from idolatry, talking about going into a pagan temple or a pagan place of worship. I speak as the sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? The blood that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. So he's talking here about a religious ritual that includes food. He says, don't do that, because what they are doing in that religious ritual, in that temple, that designated sacred setting, is they are offering sacrifices to demons, and I do not want you to be a participant in sacrifices to demons. But if you're out in the meat market, Paul says it's different. You can eat anything you want that's found there, even if it has been sacrificed to idols, before it is offered up in the meat market, because he says this back in chapter 8, therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence and that there is no God but one. There is only one true and living God, and everything, that is all meat, comes from him. So he says, and then he goes on to say, look, food will not commend us to God. We are no worse if we do not eat and no better off if we do. So he says, look, you can eat anything that's sold in the meat market. You can eat any food that's sold in a restaurant. If you go to somebody's house, you're invited over for dinner, don't ask questions for conscience sake. It's not a problem because there is no idol behind that food. We know that there's only one true God, that food, meat, ultimately comes from God. He says, I don't want you to participate in some kind of counterfeit idolatrous worship service. Don't do that. But when it comes to ordinary table food, whether it's a restaurant or the meat market or somebody's house, eat whatever you want. It's not a problem if it has prior been sacrificed to idols. So he says this over in chapter 10. Then we'll take some more calls on this subject, 888-589-8840. Here's what he says. They get very, very explicit, verse 25. So this would apply to halal food. It would apply to kosher food. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. Now, that's pretty clear, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how to make it any clearer than Paul made it right there. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. Now, if your conscience gives you a hits, then you're free to abstain. He's not saying that, but he's saying that you may freely eat. There is no sin involved. If it troubles your conscience, then you shouldn't do it, because if you go against your own conscience, that represents a sin for you. But he's saying objectively, there is no sin. There's no problem eating meat that's been sacrificed to idols. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. So you go to a friend's house, serves you halal food, eat it without asking any questions for conscience sake. There is no problem there morally or spiritually. All right. Hope that helps. Let's go to James, Martinsville, West Virginia. James, talk about the issue of nutrition and diet. What's on your mind? James, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a question. You said Mark, but God said that you can eat all things. What was that? You said Mark
7:19.
7:19.
Mark 7:19. Jesus thus declared all foods clean.
Well, I thought it was because of the fact that back in that day, during that time, the Jews classify all the Gentiles as unclean. So,
Yeah, are you talking about Peter's experience on the roof in Acts 10?
yes.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but if you go back to Mark 7, here he is specifically talking about food. And what the scripture says, thus he declared all foods clean. That's Mark 7:19.
Okay.
So there's no longer any moral or spiritual restriction on anything that we want to eat. I mean, we may want to stay away from it because of the way it affects us. I mean, there are things I don't want to eat because I don't like it or because of the effect it has on me. There are things that have effects on Debbie's body and her system that she doesn't like. No problem with that. Use common sense. If you prefer certain foods over others just because you like them more, that's fine. Paul's saying, look, we have freedom here. We don't have to be restricted by some kind of artificial restriction on what God allows you to eat or not eat, because you can, according to God, you can eat anything you want.
Okay, I'm going to study on that.
All right, well, do so and come to a conclusion at some point, James. If you do some more thinking, study about it, get back to me and let me know where you come out on that deal.
Okay.
All right, appreciate that, James. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I want to get into some material on the subject of Islam. I'm going to start with some sound bites here, and we'll have to finish them on the other side of the break. But first, I want you to get to one really bizarre. This is clip 4. We'll finish the segment with this and then get into the stuff more strictly on Islam. You know, the left is doing everything they can to spin their way out of the problems for Hillary over Benghazi. And the problem for Benghazi and for Hillary, obviously, is we have a dead ambassador. We have a dead ambassador. We have 3 other dead Americans. And this was despite, in Hillary Clinton, it was her department. I mean, her signature's on it. Maybe somebody stamped it, but it's her signature. So she's got to accept responsibility at some level for the fact that repeated requests for increased security for the diplomatic compound in Benghazi were turned down. I mean, they said they knew this was a volatile environment and they were asking for more security. Hillary Clinton would not give it to them. And the result was we have 4 dead Americans who were murdered in cold blood by a branch of Al-Qaeda. Now, this is a real problem for liberals because they want Hillary Clinton to be the next president. They know that they've got a serious problem on their hands because Benghazi is linked at the hip to Hillary Clinton. It's like an anvil around her neck. So they're trying to find any way they can to soften, to sever, or to minimize the impact of Benghazi on Hillary Clinton's chances to be the next president. Here's Eleanor Clift, card-carrying member of the left. Here's her effort to spin her way out of Hillary's problems on Benghazi.
Point out that Ambassador Stevens was not murdered. He died of smoke inhalation in a safe room in that CIA installation.
I don't think that's
fact,
but
it
Eleanor.
Changes that. I think that is.
No, I think I've heard a drastically different story from people who are also in the know about that. So I don't think it was
attack, Eleanor. He was murdered in a terrorist
It was an opportunistic terrorist attack that
opportunistic.
That grew out of that video.
The video had nothing to do with it.
There were demonstrations across the world.
This is kind of amazing. This is Eleanor Clift. I mean, she is still out there saying that this whole thing happened because of the video. And yet we absolutely know from testimony given to Congress that everybody knew at the time that the video had nothing to do with it. You know, and Eleanor Clift is trying to say, look, he wasn't murdered. He died of smoke inhalation. And Pat Buchanan's point is, look, murder is murder. Whether you die of a blow to the head or smoke inhalation, murder is murder. Focal Point AFR Talk.